Your Bible says steadfast love. The Hebrew says something else entirely. Steadfast love. 2 words, 12 letters, and every serious scholar who has ever sat with the original text will tell you the same thing. You are reading a translation of a word that English simply cannot hold. Translators have tried 6 different English phrases for it. They have argued about the right rendering for over 100 years, and the best of them have finally admitted, openly, in print, that none of the options are right. Not one. Which means every time you have read your Bible and seen those 2 words, you have seen a placeholder, a best approximation, a cartographer's confession that the territory is larger than the map. The word is chesed, pronounced chesed. A 3-letter Hebrew root, chet samech daled, Strong's number H2617. It appears in the Old Testament nearly 250 times, in the Law of Moses, in the Prophets, in the Psalms, scattered across every major division of the Hebrew Bible, which means the people who wrote this book considered it foundational. Not decorative, not occasional, foundational. They built entire liturgical poems around it. One psalm alone, Psalm 136, uses it 26 times in 26 verses, every single verse, as if the writer knew that once was not enough, that the word had to keep landing until it reached somewhere real. But before we go any further, we need to stop and be honest, because there is a version of this word that gets passed around in Bible study rooms and Sunday morning sermons, and it sounds beautiful, and it is, partly, true, but it misses the rougher, stranger, more unsettling half. The half that changes not only how you read the word, but how you understand the God it describes. Let me show you where the word lives in the Hebrew. The root of Hesed connects most naturally to a kind of eagerness, a bending towards someone, a movement in the direction of need, not a polite gesture from across the room. Something closer to the instinct of a person who sees someone fall and does not wait to be asked before moving. Before this word became theology, it was motion. The original grain points toward action before obligation, care before calculation. Keep that image. You will need it before this is over. Now let's look at how the scholarly lexicons handle this word, because that is where the story gets honest. The BDB, the Brown-Driver-Briggs Hebrew and English Lexicon, one of the oldest and most widely cited tools in biblical scholarship, organizes chesed in 2 major categories. The first, chesed between human beings, kindness, goodness, loyalty to someone who has a claim on you, friend to friend, host to guest, king to subject. The word operates inside relationships that already exist, describing the quality of faithfulness that those relationships call for. The second category in BDB, chesed from God toward people, and here the lexicon uses a phrase that deserves careful attention. It calls it loving kindness in condescending to the needs of his creatures. The word condescending is not an insult in that older theological usage. It is the classical term for God stooping, coming down to where the need is. Chesed, in its divine form, is the posture of a God who lowers himself to address a need he was under no obligation to address. Chalot, the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament, the most current and comprehensive scholarly lexicon available, gives chesed these English glosses: obligation to the community, solidarity, loyalty, faithfulness, kindness, grace. And it notes something that older translations tend to soften. The word operates most naturally inside a committed relationship, but what it describes is what happens when someone goes beyond what the relationship technically required. Chesed is not the minimum, chesed is the surplus, the more than necessary, the showing up when you technically didn't have to. That distinction is everything. Remember it. The book of Ruth contains 3 explicit uses of this word. 3, and they form the skeleton of the entire story. When Naomi's husband dies in Moab, and then both her sons die, and she is left with 2 foreign daughters-in-law and no future she can see, she does something generous and heartbreaking at the same time. She releases them. Go back, she says. Return to your mother's houses. Find new husbands. Build new lives. May the Lord show you chesed, as you have shown to the dead and to me. Ruth 1:8. Your Bible almost certainly renders that word as kindness, but Naomi is recognizing something specific. She is saying, what you have done, staying, burying, grieving alongside me, went beyond what anyone could have required of you. You owed me nothing. You gave me everything you had. Then Ruth says the most famous thing she ever said. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Ruth 1:16-17. Ruth never uses the word Hesed in this speech. She doesn't need to. She is performing it. She is the definition of the word made flesh, walking out of Moab into uncertainty, behind a woman who had nothing left to offer. Later, when Boaz notices Ruth in his field and quietly instructs his workers to leave extra grain grain for her deliberately, pulled from the bundles on purpose, placed where she would find it, Naomi hears what has happened and says, "Blessed be he by the Lord, whose chesed has not forsaken the living or the dead." Ruth 2:20. Watch what she does with the word. She starts with Boaz. Boaz did chesed, and then she folds God into the same sentence without pausing, as if Boaz's act and God's character are part of the same continuous reality. The human chesed was a window into the divine chesed, one visible, one invisible, both pointing at each other. That double register, chesed as a human act that mirrors a divine character, is part of what makes the word so dense. It travels in both directions. When we do it, we are participating in something that belongs to the nature of God. When God does it, he is doing what the best human versions of this word were always pointing at. There is a phrase in Psalm 89 that helps us feel the architecture of chesed inside a covenant. God is speaking about David and his lineage. He says, "My chesed I will keep for him forever, and my covenant will stand firm for him. If his children forsake my law and do not walk according to my ordinances, if they violate my statutes and do not keep my commandments, then I will punish their transgression with the rod, but I will not remove from him my chesed or be false to my faithfulness. I will not violate my covenant." Psalm 89, 28-34. Read that structure carefully. There are consequences for disobedience. God does not pretend the failure didn't happen. He sends the rod. But the chesed, the loyal, committed, surplus love, is not on the table. The rod can come and the chesed can remain in the same moment. They are not contradictions. Discipline is not the absence of chesed. It is sometimes the form chesed takes when another form is not enough. This is a dimension of the word your devotional culture is often too gentle to address. Chesed does not mean nothing difficult will happen to you. It means that what is difficult is not the final word. Naomi's sons died, and God's chesed was present. Jerusalem burned, and Jeremiah declared God's chesed had not ceased. The pattern holds. Chesed is not the removal of the hard thing. Chesed is the character that remains when the hard thing arrives. It is the surplus love that does not withdraw when the rod is also present. And this is one reason the English word steadfast is actually not wrong. It does capture something. What it misses is the warmth, the surplus, the beyond duty quality. But the steadfastness is real. The word does not fluctuate. The word does not recalibrate based on your current state. Picture a woman in a field. She does not belong here. Wrong country, wrong tribe, no claim on anyone's hospitality. She is gleaning, which means picking up the scraps the harvesters leave behind for the destitute. And a man who owns the land sees her and does not look away. He tells his men, quietly, without announcing it, to leave more on purpose, to let some fall from the bundles so she finds it. In that act, in the deliberate leaving of what he was not required to leave, something ancient is happening. The rabbis would say he was doing the deed of God. The text would say he was doing Hesed. In this context, those are the same statement. Now let's go to Exodus 34, because this is where Hesed becomes explicit doctrine. This is the passage the entire Hebrew Bible keeps quoting back to itself. Moses has just watched Israel do the unthinkable. While God was giving Moses the law on the mountain, the people at the foot of the mountain built a golden calf and called it God. The covenant, newly made, is already shattered. Moses smashes the tablets. He goes back up the mountain and asks God to show him his glory. God tells him, "You cannot see my face and live, but I will pass before you. I will proclaim my name." And God passes before Moses and announces not just the name Yahweh, but what that name means, what it is like to be this God. The Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in hesed and faithfulness. Exodus 34:6. Abounding. The Hebrew is rav, great, abundant, many. Not possessing a little hesed, not capable of it under the right circumstances, abounding in it, overflowing with it, more of it available than any situation can consume. And he declares this at the worst possible moment. The people have broken the covenant. They have done the one thing they swore they would not do. The relationship has been violated from their side. And God steps forward in that exact moment and announces, "This is who I am. Not who I will be if you fix this. Not who I was before you failed. Who I am." The Hesed is not contingent on their performance. It flows from his character. And his character does not renegotiate based on what happened yesterday. One scholar put it precisely. At the time of Exodus 34, Israel had absolutely no claim on God's Hesed because they had already broken the covenant. If they received Hesed, it could only be because it flowed from Yahweh's heart, from what He is, not from what they deserved. And that is the point where Hesed passes over into something the New Testament will call grace, chen in Hebrew, charis in Greek. When you read in John 1:14 that Jesus came full of grace and truth, early Jewish readers heard the Hebrew phrase chesed ve'emet from Exodus 34:6 underneath that sentence. The character declared at Sinai had, in their understanding, arrived in a person. The Psalms pick up the language of Exodus 34 repeatedly. Psalm 86:5. You, Lord, are good and forgiving, abounding in chesed to all who call to you. Psalm 100:3-8. The Lord is merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in chesed. A near direct quotation of Moses' encounter. The psalmists cite that self-announcement of God's name as if it were the most important sentence ever spoken. For them, it was. Everything in Israel's theology of who God is flows back to that cleft in the rock on Sinai. And then there is Psalm 63, which says something that sounds almost reckless. Your chesed is better than life. Psalm 63:3. Not better than a difficult life, not better than a short life, better than life itself. The psalmist is making a comparison between his own existence and God's chesed, and concluding, if I had to choose between the two, I would choose chesed, because life ends, chesed endures. Think about Psalm 136 for a moment. The temple congregation is gathered. The leader speaks. Give thanks to the Lord, for He is good. The entire assembly responds together, for His chesed endures forever. The leader speaks. To Him who made the heavens, the congregation, for His chesed endures forever. He brought Israel out of Egypt, for His chesed endures forever. He split the Red Sea, for His chesed endures forever. He remembered us in our low estate, for His chesed endures forever. He gave food to all flesh, for His chesed endures forever. 26 times. Every major act of God in Israel's history, from creation to daily bread, anchored to the same word. The congregation knew something we often miss in private, solitary Bible reading. When you say a thing 26 times in a row, you are not being repetitive. You are driving a stake into the ground. You are staking your identity on a claim that does not shift. Now I need to take the honest turn, because the scholarly history of how this word has been translated is instructive, and this is a channel that does not hide that history. In 1927, a scholar named Nelson Glueck published an influential study arguing that Hesed is fundamentally a term of covenant obligation, not sentiment, not warmth, duty. If you are in a formal covenant, a berit, Hesed is what you owe the other party. Glueck believed the word was being over-romanticized. He said, it is a legal term describing the loyalty owed within a binding agreement. His view became enormously influential and shaped entries in Halot and several other lexicons. It pushed back against sentimental readings, and in doing that, it restored something real to the word, its backbone, the weight of commitment. But later scholars pushed back on Glueck in turn. R. Laird Harris, in the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament, argued that reducing chesed to cold legal obligation strips the genuine warmth and compassion that the word unmistakably carries in its actual contexts. When Ruth says she will stay with Naomi, she owes Naomi nothing legally. Her husband is dead. She is free. She stays anyway. That is not duty. When Boaz leaves extra grain deliberately, he is under no legal requirement to do so. What he does goes further. That is not obligation. And when Jeremiah reaches for this word in the ruins, he is not reaching for a legal term. He is reaching for something that kept him from complete collapse. The scholarly consensus today is that chesed is both things at once. Loyal love, love that operates inside a committed relationship, faithful because of who the lover is and not only because of what the contract says, with the structure of covenant and the warmth of genuine care fused in a word English has never successfully invented. Obligation that exceeds obligation. Loyalty that goes beyond what loyalty required. Bible scholar Darrell Bach summarizes it as wrapping up in itself all the positive attributes of God: love, covenant faithfulness, mercy, grace, kindness, loyalty, acts of devotion that go beyond the requirements of duty. Beyond the requirements of duty. Hesed is the surplus, the overflow, the more than necessary offered freely by someone from whom you had a right to expect nothing. Michael Card, who wrote an entire book on this word, offered what may be the closest single-sentence English rendering. Hesed is when the person from whom I have a right to expect nothing gives me everything. When the person from whom I have a right to expect nothing gives me everything. That is not steadfast love. That is something closer to grace inside covenant. Something English has no word for because nothing in our common cultural experience of love quite looks like that. Now let's go to where the word lands hardest. Lamentations 3. The setting is 586 BC. The Babylonian army has burned Jerusalem to the ground. The temple is ash. The people are in exile. And Jeremiah begins the 3rd chapter with what may be the most unflinching description of suffering in the Hebrew Bible. He does not soften it. I am a man who has seen affliction under the rod of God's wrath. Lamentations 3:1. God has driven him into darkness. God has walled in his prayers so they cannot get out. God has made him a laughingstock. He reports all of this accurately, without the language of premature resolution. And then, verse 21, but this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Lamentations 3:21. Something pivots. Something underneath the suffering has not moved. And what he calls to mind, deliberately, as an act of the will, is this: the Hesed of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Lamentations 3:22-23. The familiar verse. The one behind the hymn, great is thy faithfulness. But look at where Jeremiah writes it. Not from a study, from a city still smoking, from a man who has just cataloged his suffering in full without flinching. And the word he reaches for, in this moment, in this ruin, is Hesed. Not because Hesed means everything is fine, because Hesed names something specific that has not moved even when everything else fell. The word new is chadash, fresh, renewed. Not the same expression recycled, a fresh expression of the same inexhaustible source. The God who abounds in Hesed is not drawing down a reserve. He is the reserve. The supply does not diminish because the supply is not separate from the character. Imagine sitting down to write those words. The walls of Jerusalem have been breached. The temple is ash. People you have known your entire life are being marched toward Babylon, and you are in the rubble. And a sentence rises in you, not because circumstances suggest it, not because the evidence around you supports it, but because something in you remembers a character behind all of this. Not a character who caused no suffering, a character whose Hesed has not been withdrawn even in the suffering. And you write, his mercies are new every morning. That is not denial. That is the most costly kind of faith. Faith that holds the ruin and the Hesed in the same hand and refuses to drop either. Now let's revisit the most memorized passage in the Bible with this word in front of us. Psalm 23. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. Psalm 23:6. The word translated mercy is Hesed. Most people know that, but the word translated follow is radaf, and radaf is almost never rendered follow anywhere else in the Hebrew Bible. Radaf is the word for pursuit, active, determined, relentless pursuit. When Pharaoh's army chased Israel to the edge of the sea, radaf is the word. When David's enemies hunt him, radaf is the word. Surely goodness and chesed shall pursue me all the days of my life. Not walk alongside me politely, not wait for me at the door of the house of the Lord. Chase me, hunt me down, refuse to let me outrun them. That is a different psalm than the one most of us grew up reading. The 23rd Psalm is not a pastoral scene. It is a declaration that the Chesed of God is an active pursuit of you, on your best days and your worst, in the green pastures and in the valley of the shadow, pursuing you. Not because you managed to deserve it, because that is the character of the one doing the pursuing. Here is the honest history of translation in brief. William Tyndale in the 16th century invented the compound word loving kindness, literally two words pressed together, because no single English word would do. He was honest enough to invent a new word rather than force an old one. Then Glueck's work pushed translators toward covenant loyalty. Then steadfast love became the modern compromise, capturing durability, missing warmth. Then loyal love in some recent versions, attempting to hold both. No version has satisfied everyone. Every translation committee eventually looks at the original and admits, we are choosing between inadequacies. And the implication of that honest admission is this: every time your Bible uses a different English word in a different passage, you may be reading the exact same Hebrew word without knowing it. Every time you see steadfast love in Psalms, and kindness in Ruth, and mercy in Lamentations, and loving kindness in Proverbs, that may be Chesed, 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 Chesed. The same God, the same character. 4 different placeholders sitting on top of one Hebrew truth. So let me speak directly to you now, because a word that lives only in the dictionary has already died. Most of us grew up with a version of love that is conditional by design, that rises when you perform well and withdraws when you fail, that rewards consistency and punishes need. And if that is the love you learned from parents, from institutions, from relationships, then the love of God in your imagination has probably been a slightly more patient version of the same transaction. A God who is generous when you are doing well and harder to reach when you are not. Hesed says that picture is not incomplete. It is wrong. Hesed says God declared his character at the moment Israel least deserved it. God's Hesed abounded over the ashes of a broken covenant. Naomi's daughters-in-law performed Hesed for a woman who could not pay them back. Boaz extended Hesed to a foreigner with no claim on his generosity. And Jeremiah, sitting in the ruins of everything he had served his entire life, reached for Hesed as the one thing that had not moved when everything else fell. What would it mean to live inside a love that pursues you, that acts before it demands anything in return, that does not require your performance because it was already present before the performance began? There is a gap in the English language where this word should be, and that gap is not accidental. It reflects something genuine about what we have and have not experienced. We have words for emotional affection. We have words for legal duty. We have words for polite goodwill. But we have never successfully invented a single word for loyal love that goes beyond what loyalty required, offered by someone from whom you had a right to expect nothing. And maybe the fact that English has no such word tells us something about how rarely we have actually seen it. The Hebrew saw it, Naomi saw it in Ruth's face on a road to Bethlehem. Jeremiah found it surviving in the ruins of Jerusalem. The psalmist heard it echo in the temple 26 times in a row. And Moses, in a cleft in a rock, covering his face, heard the voice of God announce it as his own name. Drop your answer in the comments. Where were you when you needed this word and didn't know it existed? Where in your life were you living inside Hesed without having a name for it? And stay close, because the next word in this series comes from the Greek New Testament. Your Bible translates it as patience, but the word Paul actually uses is hypomone. And it does not mean passive waiting. It means the capacity to stand upright under a weight that has not gone away, to remain in position under pressure that is still pressing. Whatever you are carrying right now, that word was written for exactly this. We're going there next. The Lord's Hesed endures forever. His mercies are new every morning. The word your English Bible couldn't contain. It was always trying to tell you this. A love older than your best performance and stronger than your worst failure. A love that pursues, a love that acts, a love that plants a stake in the ruins and declares, this has not moved. That is the word, that is the God, and his Hesed is still here.